about 2 in the afternoon yesterday. We stayed in orbit. We went through at least one sleep cycle, and we did all of our checkouts of the final checkouts of the lunar module, getting ready for the descent to the lunar surface, which is going to begin today about 2 o'clock. Okay, so entering lunar orbit, we had to use the engine at the base of the service module. Well, let's get the configuration down again with the lunar module. We've got the service module there, the command module, which is where you are most of the flight, against the nose of the command module, not this launch escape tower, which is only used in the first couple of minutes of flight, but the lunar module. The ascent stage against the nose, that's where you're going to be. Descent stage in the middle, big propellant tanks, big engine. The engine is out here between the legs. So you kind of have to picture that. I wish it were all set up this way here, but it's not.
Almost touching that.
So the engine at the base of the service module is what fires in retrograde to get you into orbit around the moon at a height of about 60 miles. We take that day from yesterday to today to do all the final checkouts. And at about 2 o'clock, we are ready to separate the lunar module from the command module. That separation occurs right at that point. There's a docking mechanism in the hatch that's there, and that's the separation. And the engine that's down there between the legs is going to fire to put you into an orbit now around the moon that at its high point is about 60 miles, the same orbit that we left, but its low point is about 9 miles, about 50,000 feet above the surface. And at that low point is where we're going to initiate the final descent to the surface. It takes us about an hour because it's a halfway trip around the moon to get to that low point in the orbit over the landing site, and then we initiate the final phase. So this is happening about 3 o'clock in the afternoon today, and that final phase is going to take us about 15 minutes. And friends, I hate to tell you this, but it's pretty exciting. It's more exciting than it was supposed to be for 3 reasons. Number one, the guidance system was a little bit off. And we didn't end up right over the landing site like we were supposed to. We were about 4 miles downrange from the landing site, and the astronauts looked down to survey the scene, and the only thing they even recognized is the thing called West Crater, which was out at the far west end of the pictures that they had been looking at as they prepared for the landing. So we're going to have to do a little bit of adaptation here, and we're going to have to pick out another landing site other than the one that had been planned. So we'll have to do some looking around. That's going to take a little more of our propellant. Okay, and therefore we end up using a little more of the propellant than we expected to. We hope to land with about 2 to 3 minutes of reserve propellant as we are moving around, approaching, looking at this spot, looking at that spot, translating over to find the spot. We go through the 1.5 minute alarm, the 1 minute alarm, and even the 30-second alarm goes off. Well, we probably actually had a little more than 30 seconds of fuel because it might have been because of the slosh exposed the sensor that said it was dry when it wasn't really dry, but nonetheless, that was the level of tension that was there. And then to make matters worse, we kept getting these computer alarms, which is irritating because you'd be, trying to fly your descent, all of a sudden, ring, alarm goes off. It's the 1202 alarm, meaning that the computer is overloaded. And that happens, well, there were 5 different alarms that went off in the last 3 or 4 minutes of the flight, really irritating, indicating the computers were overloaded. Maybe the guidance wasn't going to work. Maybe the computer wasn't going to set you down at all. But we had this guy on the ground that knew exactly the nature of the alarm. He said, continue to go for landing. That's not going to create an issue. The computer is not going to lock up. So we've got the confidence to go ahead and proceed with the landing. But this is the kind of things that make spaceflight interesting. Right? Well, we finally sat down on the surface like 3:17 in the afternoon today, 3.5 hours from now. So there's a lot of checkout that has to happen inside the cabin to be sure everything is ready. We're not going to immediately jump out onto the surface of the moon. That's going to happen about 9 o'clock this evening when the hatch is first open and Neil Armstrong comes down the ladder and takes that step onto the moon. He says that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. Well, it wasn't really even a small step. They thought that the pads were going to sink deeper into the soil and he'd only have to step down a couple of feet. The pads didn't sink into the soil very far. He had to actually jump 3.5 feet down to the surface from Earth. So it was a big step for a guy and a big leap for mankind as well. About 10 minutes later, Aldrin follows him outside. You all collect your immediate samples, just to be sure that if there was an immediate emergency, you'd have at least some lunar material to return. Then we set up experiments, and we collected about 47 pounds of lunar material, brought them back on board, and we wait for ascent. Now, as we're getting ready to lift off,
Come here.
this is going to happen
Go to Dad.
a little bit
Go to
after midnight tonight. So early on
Go
the
to Dad.
21st, Houston time is when we're going to start back. And the entire lunar module can't lift off the lunar surface, right? Most of the descent stage is now empty. Remember, we almost used all the propellant. And only the ascent stage is going to return. It's got its own propellant tanks, its own engine. It lifts off
wait
using
over there by
the
Dad.
descent stage as a launch platform, accelerates, fires in posigrade, catches up with the command module about 4 hours later. The command module has been in lunar orbit the entire time. With a rendezvous dock, you're rejoined back with your crewmate from the command module. You exit the lunar module, and then we jettison the lunar module and deorbit it so that it hits the surface. And now all we've got left is our command module with the 3 astronauts now safely back inside with their 47 pounds of rock, and the service module, which is propulsive capability and oxygen and power, all of that. So that engine that's at the back of the service module now is going to fire, and that's going to happen late tomorrow, and get us out of lunar orbit on a path back to Earth. And we are going to enter the atmosphere on the 24th of the month, so 4 days from now. We will be re-entering the atmosphere at a fantastic rate of speed, about almost 25,000 miles an hour, re-entering the atmosphere. And that requires a little bit of maneuvering on our part to navigate that successfully, because if just some extraterrestrial particle comes into the atmosphere that fast, it just burns up, it becomes a meteor, a streak across the sky. We don't want that to happen to our astronauts. We have to jettison the service module about 20 minutes before we enter. That thing does burn up in the atmosphere. It is the streak. But our command module is the part that's going to return safely. We've got a heat shield on the bottom. We're going to back into the atmosphere, one end first. The friction of the heat shield against the atmosphere is going to create heat. The heat shield is called ablative. Ablative means it won't conduct heat into the main part of the cabin. Rather, it will, the surface only will heat up and flake off, heat up and flake off. And
You're fine. Almost
this
done.
goes on for about 5 minutes, where these superheated flakes are flaking around, creating a cocoon around you, heated up to about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And then after another 4 or 5 minutes, you finally slow down to the point where you can deploy the parachutes and splash down in the water, 170 degrees west longitude, about 13 degrees north latitude, pretty much in the middle of nowhere because we don't land on land. Now, if you're one of these later flights, it would be wonderful because they would pick you up and put you on the aircraft carrier, sail you off to Hawaii for a couple of days of vacation, and then you come home. But not Apollo 11. Oh, no. You might be contaminated with all of these extraterrestrial microbes.
Oh, wow.
So you get onto the ship and you go immediately into the isolation chamber, and that's where you remain for the next 21 days. And
Wow.
there's this famous picture of President Nixon actually coming out, landing on the aircraft carrier to greet the astronauts, and he can't even shake their hand because they're inside this isolation chamber looking through this tiny little window, and it's all sad. So you're going to have to endure this 21 additional days of isolation before you can come out. And then immediately NASA will send you on this wonderful goodwill tour where you're treated like royalty for the rest of your lives.
Yeah.
So that's the Apollo 11 flight.
Wow.
And so hopefully you
amazing.
enjoyed the little discussion today. And again, I say I will stick around for any other questions. Comments about our little tour today are welcome. We get back, we can go to the information desk and air-conditioned comfort and provide any comments you like about our tour, so we appreciate that. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.